Air Marshal removes black girl from first class, until CO dad grounds entire flight. But what that Air Marshal did to that 12-year-old before her father arrived will make you question everything you thought you knew about safety and profiling in American aviation. Federal Air Marshal Derek Brennan's voice cut through the first-class cabin of Apex Airlines Flight 429 like a judgment. That child doesn't belong here. I don't care what her ticket says. She's coming with me right now. Something about this situation isn't adding up and I'm not taking chances. The words hit 12-year-old Jasmine Reynolds like a physical blow. Her hands, clutching her boarding pass and science fair portfolio, began trembling uncontrollably. She sat frozen in seat 3A, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, unable to process why this man with a badge was looking at her like she was a criminal instead of a child traveling alone to the most important event of her young life. And here's what we need to face right now in 2025. Racial discrimination isn't some distant memory from civil rights documentaries. It's alive and thriving at every level of society, including in federal law enforcement where air marshals with badges and authority look at black children traveling alone and immediately assume fraud, danger, criminality. And it's gotten worse than the 1960s because back then at least racism was honest and explicit. Today it hides behind words like safety concerns and protocol and doesn't add up while targeting black bodies with the same suspicion and hatred our ancestors faced. The weapons have evolved from separate water fountains to suspicious ticket investigations, but the war on black dignity continues with new soldiers wearing badges instead of hoods. And if you're watching this and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, you need to ask yourself why. Is it because you don't think a 12-year-old girl's humiliation matters? Is it because you're comfortable watching black trauma as entertainment without supporting the channels that expose these injustices? This child is about to be removed from a plane in front of everyone, and if you can't even click a button to amplify her story and put pressure on systems to change, then you're part of the problem. Subscribe now. Prove you're not just another silent bystander who watches injustice and does nothing. Jasmine felt her stomach drop, but she wasn't surprised. Hurt, yes she was. Terrified, absolutely. Humiliated beyond words. But surprised? Not at all. This was the fourth time this year someone had looked at her and immediately assumed she didn't belong, that something must be wrong, that a black child in a premium space must be there by mistake or fraud. She was 12 years old and already exhausted from constantly having to prove she had a right to exist in places where her presence made white people uncomfortable. The scene on Apex Airlines Flight 429 looked like injustice about to take flight. Jasmine sat in seat 3A, first class, her 12-year-old frame small in the spacious leather seat. Her hands shook as she held her boarding pass that clearly showed her name, her seat assignment, her valid ticket. Around her neck hung her National Science Fair credential on a lanyard. In the seat pocket in front of her was a folder containing her renewable energy project that had won her district competition and earned her this trip to Los Angeles to compete nationally. But none of that mattered to Air Marshal Derek Brennan, who stood in the aisle with his arms crossed, his badge visible on his belt, his expression set in absolute certainty that this child was a problem that needed removing. Behind him, wealthy passenger Evelyn Hartwick watched with satisfaction from seat 2B. She'd been the one to complain when she boarded late and saw a young black girl sitting alone in first class. She'd been the one to tell the flight attendant something wasn't right, that she didn't feel safe, that surely someone should investigate why an unsupervised child was in premium seating. She was platinum elite after all. Her concerns mattered. Around them, other first-class passengers watched with varying degrees of discomfort and curiosity. A businessman in 4C had his phone out, recording. A woman in 5A looked sympathetic but said nothing. A couple in 3D exchanged worried whispers but made no move to intervene. The evidence of what was happening was being captured from multiple angles, but not one person spoke up to say, "Wait, let's verify this before traumatizing a child." "Sir," Jasmine managed to say, her voice small and shaking. "My ticket is real. My dad bought it for me. I'm going to the National Science Fair. I have all my documentation." "Sure you do," Brennan said dismissively, and the condescension in his voice made it clear he'd already decided she was lying. "Your dad bought you a $1,200 first-class ticket? A 12-year-old traveling alone in first class?" That's exactly the kind of story scammers use. It's not a story, Jasmine said, tears starting to stream down her face now. It's the truth. Please just call my dad. He'll explain everything. I'm sure he will, Brennan said with obvious sarcasm. Come on. You're coming with me. We can sort this out off the aircraft. He reached for her arm. Jasmine pulled back instinctively, pressing herself against the window. I don't want to go, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't do anything wrong. Please don't make me leave. You don't have a choice, Brennan said. Either you come voluntarily or I'll have security assist. Your choice. The powerlessness was crushing. She was 12 years old, alone, facing a federal law enforcement officer who decided she was guilty of something without asking a single question about her documentation. Her father was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, unreachable on his flight from Singapore. Her teacher who'd helped her prepare for nationals was back in Chicago. The science fair started tomorrow morning. And now she was being removed from the plane in front of everyone, treated like a criminal for the crime of being a black child in first class. If you believe no child should ever be removed from a plane based on the color of their skin and baseless suspicion, keep watching. If you think racial profiling by federal agents is something we left in the past, you need to see what happens in the next few minutes. And if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now because this story is reaching people everywhere. This doesn't end the way you think it will because we're exposing the incidents that airlines and federal agencies don't want you to see. What happens next will restore your faith in justice but also break your heart at what this child has to endure first. But to understand how a brilliant 12-year-old scientist ended up being removed from an airplane by a federal agent, you need to know who Jasmine Reynolds really is. Because this nightmare didn't start with Air Marshal Brennan's suspicion. It started that morning in Chicago with excitement, careful preparation, and a dream that would soon be threatened by prejudice disguised as protocol. Jasmine Reynolds was 12 years old, a 7th grader at Carter G. Woodson STEM Academy, and exactly the kind of student that teachers dreamed about having in their classrooms. She carried a 4.0 GPA, was captain of the robotics team, and had just won her district's science fair with a renewable energy project that converted kinetic energy from foot traffic into usable electricity. Her innovation could power LED lights in low-income communities using nothing but the natural movement of people walking. It was brilliant, practical, and exactly the kind of forward thinking that the National Science Fair celebrated. Jasmine's teachers described her as focused, creative, and deeply committed to using science to solve real-world problems. She'd spent 6 months developing her project, testing prototypes in her school's hallways, refining her calculations, perfecting her presentation. When she won districts, her entire school celebrated. The local news covered her achievement. And the invitation to nationals in Los Angeles felt like validation of every hour she'd spent in the lab instead of at parties or hanging out with friends. She was being raised by her father, David Reynolds, a single parent since Jasmine's mother passed away from complications during childbirth. David had poured everything into giving his daughter the best life possible, working his way up from engineer to executive to CEO of Apex Airlines, a position he'd achieved through brilliance and determination. He'd taught Jasmine that excellence was her birthright, that her blackness was beautiful, that she could achieve anything she set her mind to. But he'd also taught her the harder lessons. That some people would see her skin color before they saw her intelligence. That she'd have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. That being excellent wasn't always enough to protect her from racism. She'd nodded during those talks, understanding in theory but not fully grasping what he meant. Until today, she'd understand completely. This trip to Los Angeles meant everything to Jasmine. Competing at nationals was the culmination of a year of work, of sacrifice, of dedication. Her project would be judged against the best young scientists in the country. College scouts would be watching. STEM program recruiters would be taking names. This was her chance to prove that a black girl from Chicago's South Side could compete with anyone, anywhere. That Saturday morning, the Reynolds household had been electric with excitement. Jasmine had packed and repacked her carry-on 3 times, making sure she had every component of her project, every backup battery, every printed chart and graph. She'd practiced her presentation one more time in front of her father, who'd smiled with pride and told her she was going to be magnificent. David had wanted to fly with her, but his schedule had him in Singapore finishing a major airline partnership deal. So he'd arranged the next best thing, a first-class ticket on his own airline, ensuring his daughter would be comfortable, well cared for, and able to rest before her big competition. He'd booked seat 3A specifically, a window seat where she could look out at the clouds and dream. He'd arranged for unaccompanied minor services, filed all the necessary documentation, and called the gate staff personally to make sure everything was set. He'd driven her to O'Hare International Airport himself, arriving early as always. In the car, he'd given her his standard speech about staying aware, calling if anything felt wrong, remembering that she was worthy of every good thing. But he'd also said something that would echo later, something that showed he understood the world they lived in better than she did yet. Baby girl, some people are going to see you and make assumptions. They're going to see a young black girl alone and they're going to think something's wrong instead of thinking you're exceptional. Don't let their limitations define you. Don't let their prejudice make you small. You belong everywhere you have the right to be. Jasmine had hugged him tight, promised to call when she landed, and walked into the airport with her head high and her future bright. Check-in had been smooth. The Apex Airlines agent had smiled warmly, complimented her science fair credential, wished her good luck at nationals. Security was routine. She'd removed her laptop, sent her project components through the scanner in their protective case, walked through the metal detector without any issues. At gate C12, she'd waited with other passengers, reviewing her notes one more time, visualizing her presentation going perfectly. Boarding flight 429 felt like the adventure beginning. She walked down the jetway with her carry-on rolling behind her, found her seat 3A, and settled in with the kind of satisfaction that comes from everything going according to plan. The first-class cabin was spacious and elegant with wide leather seats and plenty of legroom. She stowed her bag carefully in the overhead bin, making sure her project was secure, then buckled into her window seat and pulled out her presentation notes. The plane was a newer Boeing 737 MAX, modern and well-maintained, with mood lighting and large windows. Other passengers filtered into first class. A businessman in 4C who immediately opened his laptop. A woman in 5A traveling alone who smiled at Jasmine kindly. A couple in 3D who looked like they were heading on vacation. The initial crew members were wonderful. A flight attendant named Marcus had welcomed her aboard with genuine warmth, helped her with her bag, brought her a bottle of water and a snack pack without being asked. Another attendant, Lisa, had checked that she was comfortable and asked about her science fair credential. Everything felt perfect. Exactly like her father had planned it. Then Evelyn Hartwick boarded late, rushing down the aisle with the entitlement of someone who expected the world to wait for her platinum status. She was 61 years old, dressed in expensive clothes and jewelry that screamed old money, her gray hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like someone's elegant grandmother, the kind who donated to museums and sat on charity boards. But when she reached row 2 and saw Jasmine sitting alone in 3A, something shifted in her expression. A flicker of judgment. A moment of suspicion. She looked at this young black girl in first class and immediately decided something was wrong. Evelyn settled into seat 2B, but her eyes kept returning to Jasmine with barely concealed disapproval. When Marcus came by to take drink orders, Evelyn stopped him with a hand on his arm. "That child," she said in a stage whisper that Jasmine could absolutely hear. "Where are her parents? She looks lost. Is she supposed to be in first class?" Marcus glanced at his tablet. "Yes, ma'am. She's traveling as an unaccompanied minor with full documentation. Everything's in order." "Are you sure?" Evelyn's voice carried skepticism and something darker. "It just seems odd. A child that age, alone, in premium seating. Something doesn't feel right about it." "I assure you everything is proper," Marcus said, his professional courtesy strained. But Evelyn wasn't satisfied. She'd seen a black child in a space she believed didn't belong, and she was going to make it everyone's problem until someone validated her suspicion. She pressed her call button as soon as Marcus walked away. When he returned, her complaints had escalated. I don't feel safe with an unsupervised child in the cabin. What if something happens? What if there's an emergency? I'm platinum elite with this airline. Are you really going to ignore my concerns? And that's when Marcus made the decision that would change everything. He radioed the flight supervisor about a potential situation in first class. The supervisor, wanting to avoid conflict with a platinum elite member, mentioned it to Air Marshal Derek Brennan, who happened to be deadheading on this flight. Brennan, already primed by years of unconscious bias and suspicious of anything that seemed out of place, walked up to first class to assess the situation. And when he saw Jasmine, young and black and alone, he didn't see a brilliant scientist heading to competition. He saw a problem that needed solving. Jasmine noticed him approaching, saw the way his eyes hardened when he looked at her, felt the shift in energy that black people learn to recognize as danger. And that's when her perfect trip began its transformation into a nightmare that would expose the ugly truth about profiling that still flourishes in American aviation, even when the victim is a child and the perpetrator carries a federal badge. Evelyn Hartwick was not the kind of woman who accepted being dismissed. In her 61 years, she'd learned that persistence combined with status usually got her what she wanted. And right now, what she wanted was that black child removed from first class before the plane took off. She pressed her call button again. When Marcus returned, his professional smile strained, she escalated her complaints to a new level. "I need to speak with the head flight attendant," she said loudly enough that nearby passengers could hear. "This is a safety issue and I'm not being taken seriously." "Ma'am, I assure you everything is in order with that passenger," Marcus said quietly, trying to keep the situation contained. "How can you be sure?" Evelyn's voice rose. She could be traveling with a stolen ticket. She could be running away from home. What if she's unstable? What if something happens mid-flight and there's no responsible adult to manage her? "She's traveling as an unaccompanied minor with full documentation," Marcus repeated. "We have protocols for this. She's been cleared by everyone from ticketing to security to gate agents." "I don't feel safe," Evelyn said, playing her trump card. "I don't feel safe with unsupervised children in premium cabins, especially children who clearly shouldn't be here. I fly this airline twice a week. I'm a platinum elite member for 7 years running. Are you really going to ignore my concerns?" This is the weapon that people like Evelyn have always used. Status as a shield for prejudice. Influence as cover for racism. She knew that invoking her elite status would force the crew to take her seriously, to prioritize her comfort over a child's dignity, to choose the path that protected the airline's relationship with a frequent high-value customer rather than protecting a vulnerable passenger. Marcus glanced at Jasmine, who'd overheard every word and had tears streaming down her face. He saw a terrified 12-year-old who'd done nothing wrong. But he also saw 7 years of platinum elite status and the metrics his managers used to evaluate his performance. "Let me get the head flight attendant," he said, making the choice that would haunt him later. Sarah Chin, the head flight attendant with 15 years of experience, arrived at row 2 with practiced calm. "Ma'am, I understand you have concerns. Can you tell me specifically what the issue is?" "That child," Evelyn pointed directly at Jasmine, making no effort to lower her voice. "She's alone. In first class. At her age. Something is clearly wrong with this situation. Either she's got a ticket that doesn't belong to her, or she's running away, or there's some other issue. I'm uncomfortable and I'm asking you to address it." Sarah pulled up Jasmine's information on her tablet. "Ma'am, I can see here that she's a registered unaccompanied minor. Her father purchased the ticket 4 days ago. All her documentation is in order, including parental authorization forms and emergency contact information. There's absolutely nothing irregular about her travel. Then why is she in first class?" Evelyn demanded. "Children her age don't belong in premium cabins without supervision. What if there's turbulence? What if she gets sick? What if she becomes disruptive? I paid for a peaceful first-class experience, and this is unacceptable." Around them, other passengers were starting to pay attention. The businessman in 4C had lowered his laptop screen to watch. The couple in 3D had stopped their conversation. Everyone could sense conflict brewing, could feel the tension radiating from Evelyn's barely concealed anger. This is what modern racism often looks like. Not overt slurs or violence, but this performance of concern, this weaponization of safety and protocol, this insistence that black people in premium spaces must be questioned and verified and ultimately removed. Evelyn genuinely believed she wasn't being racist. She was just being cautious, just asking reasonable questions, just protecting herself and others from a situation that felt wrong to her. But what felt wrong to her was simply a black child existing in a space she decided wasn't appropriate for black children. "Ma'am," Sarah said carefully, "I appreciate your concerns, but I'm not able to remove a passenger who has proper documentation and has done nothing wrong. So you're choosing to prioritize that child over a paying platinum elite member?" Evelyn's voice had reached a volume where everyone in first class could hear clearly now. "I'm telling you I feel unsafe and you're dismissing my concerns? I want to speak to the captain. Right now." Sarah hesitated. Speaking to the captain during pre-flight would delay departure. But having an angry platinum elite member file a complaint would create problems with management. She made a calculation about which path would cause less trouble. "Ma'am, the captain is preparing for departure. But I can assure you that we take all safety concerns seriously. Let me consult with our security resources on board." And that's when Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She walked to the galley and quietly radioed the flight deck about a situation developing with a passenger expressing safety concerns about an unaccompanied minor in first class. The captain, wanting to avoid any potential issues, mentioned it to Federal Air Marshal Derek Brennan, who happened to be deadheading in business class. Brennan had been an air marshal for 12 years. He'd been trained to identify threats, to trust his instincts, to act decisively when something seemed off. And when he heard about an unaccompanied minor in first class whose presence was making another passenger feel unsafe, his bias-trained instincts told him something was probably wrong. He unbuckled and walked up to first class to assess the situation. As he approached row 3, he saw exactly what his unconscious prejudice expected to see. A young black girl, alone, in premium seating, with no visible adult supervision. To Brennan, formed by years of profiling disguised as security awareness, this fit a pattern. This looked suspicious. He didn't see a brilliant science student heading to competition. He didn't see a child whose father had carefully planned her trip. He didn't see the fear in Jasmine's eyes or the science fair credential around her neck or the project binder in the seat pocket. He saw a problem that needed investigating. And he was about to investigate it with all the authority and assumption of guilt that federal law enforcement officers have been using against black people for generations. Jasmine looked up and saw him approaching, saw the badge on his belt, saw the expression on his face that told her he'd already decided she was guilty of something. And in that moment, her excitement about the science fair, her pride in her achievement, her confidence in her right to be there, all began to crumble under the weight of suspicion she'd done nothing to earn. Marcus watched from the galley, his face showing the guilt of someone who knows they've set something terrible in motion but feels powerless to stop it. Sarah stood nearby, already regretting the call she'd made. And Evelyn sat in 2B with satisfaction, confident that her complaints were finally being taken seriously by someone with real authority. What happened next would become a national news story that would expose the ugly intersection of racial profiling, federal authority, and the assumptions people make about black children in spaces they've decided don't belong to them. Federal Air Marshal Derek Brennan stood at the end of row 3, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in first class. At 43 years old with 12 years in federal law enforcement, he carried himself with the kind of authority that made people nervous even when they'd done nothing wrong. His badge was visible on his belt. His expression was set in that neutral mask that law enforcement officers wear when they've already made up their minds but want to seem objective. "Miss, I need to see your identification and boarding pass," he said, his tone not unkind but not warm either. The tone of someone conducting an investigation rather than helping a passenger. Jasmine's hands trembled as she pulled her boarding pass from the seat pocket and her student ID from her backpack. She handed them to Brennan, her heart racing, her mind trying to understand why a federal agent was questioning her when she hadn't done anything wrong. Brennan examined both documents with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light, checking the boarding pass barcode, studying her ID like he was looking for signs of forgery. The performance was deliberate, designed to intimidate, to make her nervous, to see if she'd crack under pressure and admit to whatever wrongdoing he suspected. "Who purchased this ticket?" Brennan asked. "My dad," Jasmine said, her voice small and shaking. "And where is your dad right now?" "He's flying in from Singapore. He's meeting me in Los Angeles for my competition." Brennan's eyebrows raised slightly, the expression of someone who doesn't believe what they're hearing. "What kind of competition?" "The National Science Fair," Jasmine said, gesturing to her credential that hung around her neck on a lanyard. "I won my district with a renewable energy project, and I'm competing at nationals tomorrow." Brennan barely glanced at the credential. He exchanged a look with Sarah Chen that clearly communicated his skepticism. "This is a first-class ticket," he said, looking back at Jasmine. "Do you know how much this costs?" "No, sir," Jasmine admitted. "My dad just bought it for me." "This ticket costs $1,200, Brennan said, and the way he emphasized the number made it sound like an accusation. "You're telling me your dad bought you a $1,200 first-class ticket? A 12-year-old traveling alone?" The way he said dad carried so much skepticism it was almost a sneer. The implication was clear. He didn't believe she had a father who could afford first class, didn't believe her story about Singapore, didn't believe anything about her situation was legitimate. "Yes, sir," Jasmine said, tears starting to stream down her face now. "I can call him if you want. He gave me his number for emergencies." "This feels like an emergency. This is what racial profiling looks like when it wears a badge and hides behind protocol." Brennan wasn't following standard procedures for questioning unaccompanied minors. He hadn't checked the emergency contact information that was filed with her travel documents. He hadn't called the gate agents who'd cleared her for boarding. He hadn't verified anything except his own bias telling him that a black child in first class must be there fraudulently. "I think you need to come with me," Brennan said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "We're going to sort this out at the gate. Grab your things." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Jasmine sobbed. "Please, sir. My flight leaves in 10 minutes. I have to get to Los Angeles. The science fair starts tomorrow morning. Please don't make me leave." "This will only take a few minutes if you're telling the truth," Brennan said. "But if you refuse to cooperate, that's going to make me think you have something to hide." The threat was implicit but clear. Cooperate or face worse consequences. Come voluntarily or be forced. Submit to this humiliation or be treated as actively resisting. Jasmine had no real choice, no power, no way to defend herself against a federal agent who decided she was guilty. "I'm cooperating," Jasmine whispered. "I'll come with you. Just please let me take my stuff. My science project is in my bag. I can't lose it." "Fine," Brennan said. "Get your bag from the overhead. Let's go." Jasmine stood on shaking legs and reached for her carry-on. Marcus, the flight attendant, moved to help her but Brennan waved him off. "She can get it herself. I want to see what she's carrying." The implication that her bag might contain something suspicious, something dangerous, something that would justify his actions, was insulting and terrifying. Jasmine pulled down her carry-on, struggling with its weight, and followed Brennan toward the front of the plane. Every passenger in first class watched her walk that gauntlet of shame. Some looked sympathetic but none spoke up. The businessman in 4C recorded on his phone but said nothing. The woman in 5A looked distressed but stayed silent. Evelyn Hartwick watched with barely concealed satisfaction, vindicated in her suspicions, pleased that her concerns had been taken seriously. And if you're watching this and thinking someone should have said something, but you haven't subscribed to this channel that exposes these injustices, you need to understand you're no different from those silent passengers. A 12-year-old girl is being removed from a plane based on nothing but the color of her skin, and you can't even click a button to support platforms fighting this? Subscribe now. Don't just watch injustice. Be part of stopping it. As Jasmine walked past Evelyn's row, the older woman couldn't resist a parting shot delivered in a whisper loud enough for Jasmine to hear. "I knew something wasn't right about you. Children like you don't belong in first class." Those words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Children like you. The phrase that reduced her to a stereotype, that denied her individuality and achievement, that told her that her blackness disqualified her from premium spaces regardless of merit or payment or right. She clutched her science project binder tighter, the folder that contained a year of work, of dedication, of brilliance that would never matter to people like Evelyn and Brennan who'd already decided what she was based on how she looked. The walk from seat 3A to the aircraft door felt like miles. Every eye in first class and business class watching. Whispers following her down the aisle. A teenage girl in row 8 recording everything on her phone, probably already uploading to TikTok with some caption about drama on her flight. Jasmine stepped into the jetway, the door closing behind her with a finality that felt like her dreams being sealed away. Behind that door was the flight to Los Angeles, the competition that could change her life, the future she'd worked so hard for. And she was being pulled away from it by a federal agent who'd seen her and immediately assumed criminality. In the jetway, Brennan pulled out his radio and called airport security. "I have a potential fraudulent ticket situation here. Unaccompanied minor, story doesn't check out, claims her father bought her a first-class ticket but can't provide verification. Requesting backup to gate C12. I can verify it," Jasmine said desperately. "I can call my dad right now. He'll explain everything. Please, just let me call him." "You'll get your phone call," Brennan said. "But first we're going to wait for airport security and go through proper channels." Jasmine sank to the floor of the jetway, her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, and sobbed. Everything she'd worked for was falling apart because a racist woman had complained and a biased federal agent had believed her without question. Her science project sat beside her in its protective case. Her presentation notes were in her binder. Her dreams of competing at nationals, of proving herself, of making her father proud, all crumbling because no one would believe that a black girl could legitimately belong in first class. But what neither Evelyn nor Brennan knew was that Jasmine's phone was about to ring with a call that would expose their prejudice and careers and prove that sometimes, just sometimes, the little girl they dismissed actually has a father powerful enough to make them all pay for their assumptions. Airport security arrived within 3 minutes, 2 officers who looked bored with what they assumed was another routine ticket dispute. Brennan briefed them with the confidence of someone certain he'd done the right thing. Unaccompanied minor with a first-class ticket she claims her father bought. Story doesn't add up. She says he's flying in from Singapore, meeting her in LA, 12-year-old in a $1,200 seat. I'm thinking stolen credit card or she's running from something. The security officers looked at Jasmine sitting on the jetway floor, crying into her knees, clutching a science fair binder. One of them, Officer Maria Santos, seemed less convinced than her partner. "Did you check her emergency contact information?" Santos asked Brennan. "Unaccompanied minors have to have all that on file." "I'm checking her story first," Brennan said. "If it doesn't hold up, the paperwork doesn't matter." "That's backward protocol," Santos said quietly. "You're supposed to verify documentation before removal." "I used my discretion based on the situation," Brennan said, his tone making it clear he didn't appreciate being questioned. A passenger expressed legitimate safety concerns. "I responded appropriately." Jasmine looked up at Officer Santos with desperate hope. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please just let me call my dad. He'll explain everything. His name is David Reynolds. He works for Apex Airlines. He bought my ticket. I have his number right here." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, the screen showing her wallpaper, a photo of her and her father at her district science fair victory, both of them beaming, her holding her trophy, his arm around her shoulders with unmistakable pride. Santos looked at the photo, then at Jasmine's tear-stained face. "Kid, I'm going to let you make that call. But understand that if your story doesn't check out, this gets a lot more complicated for you." "It will check out," Jasmine said. "I promise. I'm not lying. I've never lied about anything important in my life." She found her father's contact, her finger hovering over the call button. Half a world away, or so she thought, David Reynolds was about to receive the call that would transform him from loving father to avenging executive in seconds. The phone rang once. Twice. Jasmine held her breath, praying he wasn't still in the air, praying his phone wasn't off, praying that someone, finally, would believe her. On the third ring, he answered, his voice warm and full of love. "Baby girl, did you make your flight okay? Are you in the air yet?" And that's when Jasmine completely broke down, all the fear and humiliation and injustice of the past 20 minutes pouring out in sobs so intense she could barely speak. "Daddy," she managed through her tears. "Daddy, they made me get off the plane. They said I don't belong in first class. They said my ticket is fake. They said you didn't really buy it. Nobody believes me, and I'm going to miss my flight, and I'm going to miss the science fair, and I didn't do anything wrong, Daddy. I swear I didn't do anything wrong." On the other end of the line, David Reynolds stood up from the table in Apex Airlines' executive lounge, his entire body going rigid. "Baby, where are you right now? Who's with you?" "I'm in the jetway. There's an air marshal and security officers." The air marshal said my story doesn't add up. "Daddy, I'm so scared." David's voice transformed from concerned father to commanding CO, the voice that made executives jump and stock prices move. "Put the air marshal on the phone. Right now." Brennan took the phone with an expression of barely concealed condescension, expecting to humor an angry parent before continuing his investigation. "This is Federal Air Marshal Derek Brennan. Sir, your daughter has been temporarily detained while we verify her travel documentation." The voice that came through the phone made Brennan's face go pale. "This is David Reynolds, CO of Apex Airlines. You just removed my daughter from my plane on my airline. What is your badge number?" The color drained from Derek Brennan's face so quickly that Officer Santos actually took a step closer, concerned he might pass out. His hand holding Jasmine's phone began to tremble. "Mr. Reynolds," Brennan stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "I was responding to crew concerns about a potential situation with an unaccompanied minor. Standard protocol for." "Standard protocol?" David's voice came through the phone speaker loud enough that everyone in the jetway could hear his controlled fury. "You removed a 12-year-old child from her seat based on what exactly? What protocol did you follow?" "A passenger expressed safety concerns," Brennan said, grasping for justification. "She felt uncomfortable with an unsupervised child in premium seating, and I was alerted by the crew to assess the situation." "So you assessed it by removing my daughter without verifying her documentation? Without calling the emergency contact listed on her unaccompanied minor form? Without checking with gate agents? Without following any actual protocol?" "Sir, the passenger's concerns seemed legitimate and the situation appeared suspicious," Brennan tried. "Appeared suspicious," David repeated, his voice dropping to a deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "Let me tell you what appeared suspicious to you, Marshal Brennan. You saw a black child alone in first class and you immediately assumed she didn't belong there. You assumed fraud. You assumed theft. You assumed anything except that her father legitimately purchased that ticket for her. Say it. Tell me I'm wrong." Brennan's silence was damning. "Did you verify her ticket in the system?" David continued. "Did you see that it was purchased 4 days ago with my corporate credit card? Did you look at the notes on her booking that clearly identify her as my daughter, traveling to the National Science Fair? Did you read the emergency contact information that lists my direct office number? I was in the process of verification when you decided to remove her first and verify later," David finished. "You saw a black child and your bias told you guilty until proven innocent. How many times have you done this before, Marshal Brennan? How many other black passengers have you profiled and removed without following protocol?" Officer Santos was now recording the conversation on her own phone, her face showing growing anger at what she was hearing. Her partner looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, recognizing they'd been pulled into something that was going to explode into a major incident. "Mr. Reynolds, I made a judgment call based on my training and experience," Brennan said, trying to regain some authority. "Your judgment call traumatized my daughter," David said. "Your training apparently taught you to see black children as threats. And your experience has clearly been making these kinds of racist assumptions without consequences until now. Transfer me to your supervisor immediately." "Sir, I don't have direct contact with." "Then get someone who does," David commanded. "You're going to connect me with TSA supervision, with Air Marshal Service Management, and with my own airline's operations team. You're going to do it in the next 60 seconds, or I'm making calls that will have federal investigators reviewing every decision you've made in your career." Brennan's hand shook as he pulled out his radio. "This is Air Marshal Brennan, badge 2749. I need immediate supervisor contact for a situation at gate C12. While they waited, David spoke directly to Jasmine again, his voice softening. "Baby girl, are you okay? Did anyone hurt you physically?" "No, Daddy," Jasmine sobbed. "They just made me feel like I was a criminal. Like I didn't deserve to be there. Like I was lying about everything." "You deserve to be there," David said fiercely. "You earned that seat. You earned that trip. And every person who made you feel otherwise is about to learn what happens when they mess with my daughter." Within 3 minutes, Brennan had patched through a conference call connecting David Reynolds with TSA Supervision, Air Marshal Service Regional Management, and Apex Airlines Chief Operating Officer Jennifer Morrison. Each person who joined the call came in with varying levels of concern until they heard who was on the line. "This is David Reynolds, CEO of Apex Airlines," David said to the assembled group. "I'm going to say this once. My 12-year-old daughter was racially profiled and removed from Flight 429 by Air Marshal Derek Brennan. He followed no protocol. He made no verification calls. He saw a black child in first class and immediately assumed criminality. I want his badge number on record. I want every decision he made reviewed. And I want answers about how a federal agent can remove a child from a plane based solely on bias." "Mr. Reynolds," the Air Marshal supervisor began, "I'm sure we can review the situation and determine what procedures were followed." "No procedures were followed," David interrupted. "My daughter is sitting on a jetway floor crying because your agent decided she looked suspicious. I'm looking at her booking file right now. Valid ticket purchased with my credit card. Emergency contact, my direct line. Unaccompanied minor documentation, complete and approved. Marshal Brennan made 0 calls to verify any of this. He just removed her." Jennifer Morrison, the COO, spoke up. "David, I'm pulling up her file now. Everything shows green. All documentation approved. Gate agents cleared her. She was properly checked in. There was no flag on her booking. And yet she's not on the plane," David said. "She's in a jetway being treated like a criminal while her flight is about to depart without her. So here's what's going to happen." He paused, and everyone on the call waited. "Flight 429 is grounded," David said, and the words landed like a bomb. "No one boards. No one deplanes. That flight does not move until I arrive at that gate and personally address what happened to my daughter." "Sir," the captain protested from the flight deck where he'd been patched into the call. "We're scheduled for departure in 8 minutes. We'll miss our slot. The passengers will. I don't care if we miss every slot for the next week," David said. "My daughter was humiliated and removed from that aircraft. This flight is grounded until I get there. And everyone involved in this decision is going to explain to me, face to face, why they thought it was acceptable to treat a child this way." The line went silent as the gravity of what David had just done sank in. Grounding a commercial flight was unprecedented. The cost in delays, missed connections, and passenger compensation would be enormous. But David Reynolds had just made it clear that no amount of money mattered more than his daughter's dignity. "Marshal Brennan," David's voice came through one more time. "Stay exactly where you are. I'll be at gate C12 in 12 minutes. And you're going to explain every decision you made to my face." The announcement came over the gate speakers 30 seconds later, the captain's voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an unexpected operational delay. All passengers must remain on board. We'll provide updates as the situation develops." Inside the aircraft, groans and complaints rippled through the cabin. Business people checked their watches and pulled out phones to rearrange meetings. Families with connecting flights started calculating whether they'd make their next plane. Evelyn Hartwick sat in 2B looking suddenly less confident, a flicker of concern crossing her face as she wondered if this delay had anything to do with the child she'd complained about. Flight attendant Marcus stood in the galley, his stomach churning with dread as the pieces started coming together. Sarah Chin had gone pale when the captain briefed the crew on what was happening. They'd just grounded a commercial flight because the CEO's daughter had been removed, and everyone involved in that decision was about to face consequences. In the jetway, Jasmine had stopped crying and was now pressed against her father's side through the phone, listening to him make call after call. His voice had that cold precision that she recognized from when he was handling serious business problems, But underneath it she could hear the father who was barely holding back his rage. "Jennifer," David said to the COO, "I need every camera angle from that gate and aircraft. I need the audio from crew communications. I need the names of everyone who made a decision in this chain, from the flight attendant who called it in to the supervisor who approved contacting the air marshal." "Already pulling it," Jennifer responded. "David, the passenger who initiated the complaint is Evelyn Hartwick. Platinum elite for 7 years. She told crew she felt unsafe with an unaccompanied minor in first class. Find every flight she's taken with us," David said. "I want to know if this is a pattern. I want to know if she's complained about other black passengers. And Jennifer, her platinum status is revoked effective immediately. She's banned from Apex Airlines for life. That's going to create blowback," Jennifer warned. "She's connected. Her husband is." "I don't care if her husband is the president," David interrupted. "She weaponized her status to have my child removed from a plane. She's done flying with us." Officer Santos, who'd been listening to all of this, stepped closer to Brennan. "You didn't verify anything," she said quietly. "You just believed the white woman over the black child without checking a single document." "I was responding to a legitimate safety concern," Brennan said, but his voice had lost all its earlier authority. He knew his career was imploding in real time. "What safety concern?" Santos demanded. "A kid with a science fair binder? A kid who handed you her ID and boarding pass immediately? A kid who offered to call her father? You didn't see a threat. You saw a black child in first class and decided she must be there illegally." The Air Marshal Service supervisor came back on the conference call. "Marshal Brennan, you're suspended effective immediately pending full investigation. You'll surrender your badge and weapon to local TSA supervision. You're to have no contact with the minor or her family." "Understood," Brennan said, the word barely audible. "And Marshal Brennan," David's voice came through with finality, "I'm forwarding your badge number to my legal team. They'll be determining whether we're pursuing federal civil rights charges. You racially profiled a child. You used your authority to inflict trauma on a 12-year-old who'd done nothing wrong. You're going to answer for that." Jasmine looked up at Brennan, this man who'd seemed so powerful and certain 20 minutes ago. Now he looked small, defeated, a federal agent whose bias had finally caught up with him. But seeing his downfall didn't make her feel better. It didn't undo the humiliation. It didn't stop her hands from shaking or her heart from racing. "I just wanted to go to my science fair," she whispered. Officer Santos knelt beside her. "I know, sweetheart. And you're going to get there. Your dad's making sure of it." Through the windows looking into the gate area, they could see a commotion. Security guards were clearing a path. Passengers in the waiting area were standing, trying to see what was happening. And then David Reynolds appeared, moving through the crowd like a force of nature. He was flanked by 3 people: Apex Airlines chief legal officer carrying a tablet and briefcase, the head of security with a grim expression, and Jennifer Morrison, the COO, who'd been giving him updates by phone during his race to the airport. David had been in downtown Chicago for a meeting when Jasmine's call came. He'd been planning to surprise her at the science fair in Los Angeles, flying in separately to watch her compete. But the moment he heard her crying, heard her say they didn't believe her, he'd abandoned everything and raced to O'Hare. Now he was here, and his face showed the barely controlled fury of a father who just learned his child had been traumatized by the very people who were supposed to protect her. He reached the jetway entrance and the security guards stepped aside. His eyes found Jasmine immediately and his expression cracked for just a moment, the CO mask falling away to reveal a father's anguish. "Baby girl," he said, and Jasmine launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist and sobbing into his chest while he held her like she might disappear if he let go. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Do you hear me? They made me feel like I was lying," Jasmine sobbed. "Like I was stealing. Like I didn't deserve to be there." "You deserve everything good in this world," David said fiercely. "Every single thing. And anyone who made you feel otherwise is about to learn that lesson the hard way." He held her for another long moment, letting her cry, letting her feel safe again, letting her know that her father was here now and nothing else could hurt her. Then he straightened, his hands still on Jasmine's shoulder, and turned to face Derek Brennan and the assembled group with an expression that made everyone take an involuntary step back. The reckoning had arrived. And it was going to be devastating. David Reynolds looked at Derek Brennan for a long moment, his silence more powerful than any words. The Air Marshal, who'd wielded his authority so confidently 30 minutes ago, now stood with his shoulders hunched, unable to meet the CEO's eyes. "Marshal Brennan," David finally said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Walk me through your decision-making process. From the moment you were alerted about my daughter to the moment you removed her from the aircraft. Every single step." Brennan cleared his throat. "I received information from the crew about a passenger concern regarding an unaccompanied minor in first class. When I approached, I observed a young passenger alone without visible adult supervision. I requested identification and boarding documentation to verify." "Stop," David interrupted. "You observed a young passenger. Describe her. What specifically did you observe that made you decide removal was necessary?" Brennan's face flushed. "Sir, I don't see how." "Describe her," David repeated. "Because I want to hear you say it. I want everyone here to hear you say what you saw when you looked at my daughter." The silence stretched. Brennan knew the trap. Any description he gave would reveal his bias. "She's black," David said for him. "That's what you observed. A black child sitting alone in first class. And your training, your instinct, your experience, whatever you want to call it, told you that was suspicious. That's the only factor that mattered to you, wasn't it?" "That's not fair," Brennan protested weakly. "I was responding to a legitimate passenger concern about safety." "What safety threat?" David demanded. "A 12-year-old girl with a science textbook and a project binder? A child wearing a National Science Fair credential? A child who immediately complied with your requests and offered to call her father? She couldn't provide immediate verification," Brennan tried. "Because you never asked for verification," David said, pulling out his phone and turning it toward the group. "This is my daughter's booking record. Ticket purchased 4 days ago with my corporate Amex. Unaccompanied minor documentation filed and approved. Emergency contact, my direct office line, my cell phone, my executive assistant's number. All of this was in the system. All of this was accessible to you with one call. Did you make that call?" "I was in the process of gathering information," Brennan said. "You were in the process of removing a black child from a plane because you assumed she didn't belong there," David corrected. "You made 0 calls. 0 verifications. You just saw, judged, and acted on pure bias. How many times have you done this before, Marshal? How many other black passengers have you profiled and removed without consequences?" Brennan had no answer. David turned to the TSA supervisor who'd joined the group. "I want a full review of Marshal Brennan's service record. Every passenger interaction. Every removal he's authorized. I want to know if this is a pattern." "Mr. Reynolds," the supervisor said carefully, "Marshal Brennan has already been suspended pending our internal investigation. We take these allegations very seriously." "Do you?" David asked. "Because my daughter sat on this floor crying for 20 minutes while you conducted your investigation. She missed her flight. She's traumatized. She'll probably have anxiety about flying for years. And all of that happened because your agent saw a black child and immediately assumed criminality. That's not an allegation. That's documented fact." He gestured to Officer Santos. This officer tried to get Marshal Brennan to follow protocol. He refused. He was determined to prove my daughter was lying before he'd verified a single document. David turned next to the chief legal officer, who stepped forward with her tablet. "We have statements from 3 flight attendants who confirmed Jasmine's documentation was complete before boarding. We have gate agent logs showing no flags or concerns. We have camera footage of Jasmine boarding normally and settling into her seat without incident. The only thing that changed was Evelyn Hartwick's complaint and Marshal Brennan's decision to act on it without verification." "Where is this Evelyn Hartwick?" David asked. "Still on the aircraft in seat 2B, Jennifer Morrison said. "Bring her out here," David ordered. "She started this. She gets to face the consequences too." 2 security officers boarded the plane and returned moments later with Evelyn, who'd clearly heard enough through the aircraft door to know she was in serious trouble. Her earlier confidence had evaporated completely. "Ms. Hartwick," David said, his voice cold. "You complain that my daughter made you feel unsafe. Explain to me what about a 12-year-old with a science project created a safety concern that required federal intervention." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed. "I just thought something seemed off. A child that young, alone in first class. It didn't seem right." "It didn't seem right," David repeated. "A black child in premium seating didn't seem right to you. Say what you mean, Ms. Hartwick. You didn't think she belonged there because of how she looks." "That's not what I meant," Evelyn protested. "I was concerned for her welfare." "Then why didn't you ask her if she needed help?" David demanded. "Why didn't you speak to her kindly? Why did you go straight to the crew with safety concerns and demands for removal?" "Because you weren't concerned for her welfare. You were concerned that a black child was sitting near you in first class." Evelyn had no response. "Your platinum elite status is revoked," David said flatly. "You're banned from Apex Airlines for life. And I'm forwarding this incident to your employer because I want them to know exactly who they have representing their company." Evelyn's face went white. "You can't do that. I'm a valued customer. I fly twice a week for work." "You were a valued customer," David corrected. "Now you're someone who weaponized her status to have a child removed from a plane based on racism. Actions have consequences, Ms. Hartwick. You're about to learn that lesson thoroughly." He turned back to the assembled group. "Flight 429 will depart as soon as my daughter is reboarded in her original seat. Every passenger on that flight will receive a full refund and travel voucher. And I'm going to address them personally about what they witnessed and what their silence enabled." David placed his hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Baby girl, are you ready to get on that plane and go win your science fair?" Jasmine nodded, wiping her tears. "I'm ready, Teddy." "Then let's show everyone that you belong exactly where you choose to be." David Reynolds walked onto Flight 429 with Jasmine's hand firmly in his, Jennifer Morrison and the legal team following behind. The cabin went silent as passengers recognized that something significant was happening, that this wasn't just another operational delay. Marcus and Sarah, the flight attendants who'd made the initial calls that led to Jasmine's removal, stood near the galley looking like they wanted to disappear. David made eye contact with both of them, his expression making it clear their employment status would be discussed later. He walked Jasmine directly to seat 3A, her original seat, and helped her settle in. Then he stood in the aisle and addressed the cabin, his voice carrying clearly to every passenger. "My name is David Reynolds. I'm the CEO of Apex Airlines, and I'm also this young lady's father. 30 minutes ago, my 12-year-old daughter was removed from this aircraft by a Federal Air Marshal based on a complaint from a passenger who felt unsafe around her. My daughter had committed no offense. She had valid documentation. She was traveling to the National Science Fair where she's competing with the Renewable Energy Project. The only thing suspicious about her was that she's a black child sitting in first class." Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the cabin. The businessman in 4C who'd recorded everything looked down at his phone. The woman in 5A had tears in her eyes. "Many of you watched what happened," David continued. "Some of you recorded it. But not one person spoke up to say this is wrong. Not one person asked to see her documentation before she was removed. Not one person stood between a child and the adults who were failing her. That silence enabled what happened to my daughter." He paused, letting that sink in. "Flight 429 will depart shortly. Every passenger will receive a full refund and a travel voucher. But I want you to think about what you witnessed today and what you chose to do about it. Because the next time you see injustice happening, the next time you see someone being treated unfairly because of how they look, you have a choice. You can record it for social media, or you can intervene. You can stay silent, or you can speak up. Choose better than you did today." The cabin remained silent, passengers processing their complicity, their shame written on faces throughout first class. David kissed Jasmine's forehead. "I'll see you in LA, baby girl. Go win that science fair." "I will, Daddy," Jasmine said, her voice stronger now. As David deplaned, he stopped at the jetway where Brennan still stood with his supervisor, now stripped of his badge and weapon. "Marshal Brennan, you're suspended pending investigation," David said. But let me be clear about what I expect the outcome to be. You will never work another flight. You will face every consequence available under federal civil rights law. And your bias will be used as a training case for every air marshal in the country about what not to do. Brennan nodded mutely, his career destroyed, his actions about to become a national example of exactly the kind of profiling that federal agents are supposed to prevent, not perpetrate. David turned to Evelyn Hartwick, who stood nearby with her bags, banned from boarding, her own flight home now uncertain. Ms. Hartwick, I meant what I said. You're banned for life. And I've already contacted your employer, Hartwick Realty. They'll be receiving a full report of today's incident. I suspect your clients will be very interested to know how you treat black people when you think no one important is watching. Evelyn's face crumbled as she realized the full scope of consequences descending on her. Her status, her convenience, her reputation, her career. All of it jeopardized because she couldn't tolerate a black child sitting near her in first class. David walked back through the terminal toward the exit, his legal team briefing him on next steps. Federal investigation into Brennan. Civil rights complaints. Policy changes that would need to be implemented across the industry. But his mind was already in Los Angeles at the science fair, watching his daughter present her project and prove to herself and everyone else that she belonged exactly where she chose to be. Behind him, Flight 429 finally pushed back from the gate, 45 minutes delayed, every passenger carrying the weight of their silence and a story they'd be telling for years about the day they watched a child be removed from a plane and did nothing until her father, who owned the airline, arrived and made them all face what their complicity had enabled. Sometimes justice comes. Sometimes the right person has the power to enforce it. But the real question is why it took a CEO father to make it happen. Why couldn't any of those passengers, any of those crew members, any of those witnesses have been brave enough to say stop before a child was traumatized? That question would haunt them far longer than any travel delay. David Reynolds held a press conference at Apex Airlines headquarters the next morning, with Jasmine standing beside him in her National Science Fair competitor badge. News cameras from every major outlet crowded the room. Apex Airlines failed my daughter yesterday, David said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. As CEO and as a father, I take full responsibility. We had protocols in place to protect unaccompanied minors. Those protocols were ignored. Effective immediately, we're implementing mandatory implicit bias training for all staff, new procedures requiring supervisory approval before any unaccompanied minor can be questioned, and a $100,000 scholarship fund in Jasmine's name for young black girls pursuing STEM education. The story went viral within hours. 8 million views by evening. News coverage on every network. The hashtag Justice for Jasmine trending nationally. Federal Air Marshal Derek Brennan was permanently reassigned to desk duty after a review found 3 other instances of questionable passenger removals, all involving black travelers. He never worked another flight. Evelyn Hartwick's ban made headlines. Hartwick Realty quietly asked her to retire after major clients pulled contracts, unwilling to be associated with someone whose racism had been exposed so publicly. Flight attendants Marcus and Sarah faced disciplinary action. Sarah was suspended for 2 weeks without pay. Marcus, devastated by his role in Jasmine's trauma, became an internal advocate and helped design the new protection protocols. Jasmine made her flight in the captain's jump seat, getting a cockpit tour and landing in Los Angeles with enough time to prepare. She competed at nationals and won second place, her presentation receiving a standing ovation. In her acceptance speech, she thanked everyone who believed me when others wouldn't, and dedicated her award to kids who get told they don't belong. 6 months later, the Jasmine Reynolds Act passed, requiring federal implicit bias training for all TSA and Air Marshal Service personnel. Congressional testimony included Jasmine's story as the catalyst for change. And if you've watched this entire story, felt the injustice of what happened to Jasmine, felt anger at the system that failed her, but you still haven't subscribed to this channel, ask yourself what that means. Are you really against racism or just against having to do anything about it? Subscribing costs nothing. Takes 2 seconds. But it amplifies these stories, pressures systems to change, shows families like the Reynolds that people care enough to act. If you can't click a button after watching a 12-year-old be traumatized, you're no different from those passengers who watched and stayed silent. Don't just consume this story. Be part of the solution. Subscribe now. David framed the news coverage in his office. Jasmine holding her second-place trophy, the headline reading "Young Scientist Triumphs After Discrimination." Below it, a quote he'd written, "Sometimes being a CEO means nothing compared to being a dad who shows up." Jasmine never doubted she belonged in first class again. Not because her father owned the airline, but because he'd made it crystal clear that her worth wasn't determined by other people's bias. She belonged everywhere she had the right to be, and anyone who suggested otherwise would face consequences. But late at night, she still had nightmares about that jetway, about Brennan's skeptical face, about Evelyn's satisfaction at her removal. The second-place trophy sat on her shelf, a symbol of her brilliance. But next to it was her boarding pass from Flight 429, a reminder of the day she learned that excellence doesn't always protect you from racism, but having people who believe in you and fight for you makes all the difference. Change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when those with power use it to protect those without it. David Reynolds had that power and used it. But the real question remains, what do you do when you witness injustice and you're just a passenger, just a bystander, just someone watching? Do you record it for clicks? Or do you intervene? Do you stay silent to avoid discomfort? Or do you speak up even when it's hard? Jasmine's story had a resolution because her father had power. But how many other black children face the same treatment with no one powerful enough to stop it? How many are removed, humiliated, traumatized, and never get justice because their parents don't own the airline? That's the real tragedy. Not that racism exists, we already knew that. But that it takes extraordinary circumstances, exceptional power, and viral outrage to get basic dignity and accountability. The Jasmine Reynolds Act was a victory. The policy changes at Apex Airlines were progress. But Jasmine still carries trauma from that day. Still has to prove she belongs. Still lives in a world where her skin color makes people suspicious before they know her name. That's the imperfect ending. Justice came, but innocence was lost. Change happened, but scars remained. And a brilliant 12-year-old scientist learned a lesson no child should have to learn. That sometimes being exceptional isn't enough, and the world will still try to put you in your place. But she also learned that she has a father who will move heaven and earth to protect her, a voice to speak her truth, and a story that changed policy and might protect the next black child who sits in first class and faces someone who thinks they don't belong. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.